Chapter, The Happy Warrior, the story of Alfred E. Smith. The man in the brown derby, a symbol of American political integrity. Admired by the great and powerful, Al Smith was the hero of the humblest of the humble, New York City's newsboys. But at the crest of his career, the happy warrior was destined to meet his hardest test and bitterest disappointment. Campaigning for president in 1928, Al Smith came to Oklahoma City and faced the most difficult decision of his life. Religious attacks had been made against him, bigotry inspired by the Ku Klux Klan. Al's friends advised him to sidestep the religious issue. But could he do so and remain true to his ideals of Americanism? He recalled New York City, the melting pot where he was born and raised. The crowded streets in which he had played with kids of every faith and nationality. Fulton Fish Market, where he worked as a young man, was his university of hard knocks. Graduated into politics by way of Tammany Hall and was elected to the New York State Assembly in Albany, New York. Smith served several terms in the Assembly. He was married, father of 5 children, and seemed to be a run-of-the-mill Tammany politician. Then in 1911 came a tragedy that changed the course of his career. In New York City, flames raced through a factory building. 500 girls on the upper floors were unable to escape. The firemen's ladders were too short to reach the trapped workers. 125 girls died in the catastrophe. Al Smith met with Robert Wagner, who would later write the Wagner Labor Act. They wanted laws which would make impossible a repetition of the disaster. Al Smith wrote the new laws and worked with all his strength to get them passed. Folks were beginning to look to him for leadership. His new home on Oliver Street, New York City, was a big step up from the earlier tenements. But he could only spend weekends with his family. Weekdays, Al was hard at work at the state capitol. Nevertheless, he was a thoughtful father, a pal to his sons, and a good husband to his wife, Katie. Those were busy days, but Al was never too busy to see his aged mother. Each weekend he'd visit her. Then down to City Hall to meet with political cronies. Always keep in touch with the voters. Did that man want a favor? Al would do his best. Forward-looking and energetic, respected by both Democrats and Republicans, he was marked for political success. It came rapidly. Speaker of the State Assembly in 1912. Governor of New York in 1918. From the East Side slums to the stately governor's mansion, Al Smith had come a long way. And this was no routine change of administrations. His labor advisor was Francis Perkins. His commissioner of parks, Robert Moses, a Republican. Moses began a vast program of road building and development of state parks. He and Smith met angry opposition. But the result was New York's fine system of modern highways and beaches where New Yorkers could find relaxation at small cost. At the Democratic National Convention of 1920, Franklin Delano Roosevelt nominated Al Smith for the presidency. Al's fame had spread beyond New York. When Al's turn came to speak, he spoke well and won an ovation. But he wasn't nominated. He returned to New York and a stiff fight for re-election as governor. On election night in Times Square, he received the bad news. He'd been defeated. It was a hard blow to his pride. Let others carry the burden, he said. Al Smith would never again run for public office. Defeated for governor, Al Smith returned to New York City and looked for a job. He didn't have to look far. Many jobs were offered. He became president of a trucking company. Salary, $50,000 a year. A lot of money for a man who started out sweeping floors in a fish market. For the first time in his life, he had leisure and turned to sports. Al took up golf and enjoyed it. He went bathing often at those new beaches he'd built. But Al Smith was a politician to the bone. He missed the rough and tumble of politics. 2 years later, he was asked to run again for governor. He accepted and won the election by a landslide. His supporters were jubilant. Al and his wife were given a happy send-off as they started back to Albany. In Albany, a victory parade. His vow to give up politics was forgotten. He waved back happily to the cheering crowd. The governor's mansion, returning after 2 years' absence, Al and his wife had thought they'd never see the inside of the mansion again. For them, it was a true homecoming. That was equally true for the Smith children, who had many friends and playmates in Albany. The inauguration held in the Assembly Building was a great moment for the Smith family. Speaking in the Assembly chamber where he had served for many years, Al pledged himself to unselfish service to the state. His former administrations had been good, but this one he promised would be outstanding. Quickly, he called his cabinet together and plunged into work. Departments were reorganized. Dead wood was eliminated. Important new legislation was passed. The state needed new prisons, hospitals, and sanatoriums. To meet that need, Al Smith started a great new program of public works. To critics, he retorted, "Let's look at the record." The record looked good to the voters of New York. So good that Al Smith was re-elected governor in 1924 and again in 1926. His reputation now was nationwide. Then came the Democratic National Convention of 1928. The undisputed leader of New York Democrats, Al Smith was a logical candidate for president. Al wanted that high post, and he had strong supporters. One of them was industrialist John J. Raskob. Another of his backers was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt put Al Smith's name in nomination with a ringing speech. And this time Al Smith won, nominated for president on the first ballot. Al Smith stumped the country appealing for votes. That was easy in New York. He swung west to Omaha, aware that this was the hardest fight of his career. Herbert Hoover was a strong opponent. In Chicago, Al appeared before huge crowds, pleading for the principles in which he believed. A revision of the Prohibition Law, conservation of water power, relief for farmers. But while he appealed to the voters' intelligence, others appealed to their basest emotions. Flaming crosses burned in the night. The Ku Klux Klan opened a campaign of savage hate against Al Smith because of his religion. Bigotry was injected into the election. As Al Smith came to Oklahoma City, the issue reached a climax. Should Smith evade the question of his religion, or should he meet it squarely, even though it might cost him the election? But wasn't this country founded on freedom of religion? Al Smith decided that he had to speak out. His speech that night was one of the bravest ever made in politics. He denounced the evil issue of religious bigotry. He wanted no man to vote for him because he was a Catholic or against him because of it. Let the people decide this election on the real issues. That speech was an act of faith and courage, but it failed. In Albany, Smith turned the governor's mansion over to his successor, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Then rumors that Smith was made bitter by his defeat It wasn't true, but he was very weary. 25 years of politics had left him exhausted. Retiring from politics, Al welcomed the chance to spend more time with his wife and grandchildren. A chance to bring joy to other people's kids. On Christmas, he gave toys to the underprivileged children of New York City.
What's your name, young fella? Alfred? Why, Al, put it there. Glad to see you.
A chance to earn financial security for his family. In 1929, he was made president of the Empire State Building, the tallest in the world. A few years later, Smith received one of the highest honors of the Catholic faith. For his charitable work in New York, he was made a papal chamberlain. Cardinal Spellman, then an archbishop, presided at the ceremony. Al Smith Bitter, on his 66th birthday, he praised America as the land of opportunity and told his grandchildren,
"And I hope that the United States of America will offer to you the same opportunity that it gave to me."
No bitterness, only gratitude to the land that made his success possible. Al Smith, from beginning to the end, a happy warrior.